This I believe. If you really want to experience a place, you need to walk around it. There are other options that all have their advantages, but walking for me will always be the best. This channel is usually about whatever I've been working on in the shop. Sometimes large-scale public art, sometimes weird little things that I just thought needed to exist. But at the risk of offending the great and terrible algorithm, I decided to do something a bit different this time. See, human-powered transportation has been a long-standing obsession of mine. Biking, certainly, and some paddling, but most of all walking. Urban hikes, to be specific, and I usually try and do something big around Labor Day each year. Back in 2019, I spent 5 days walking around Lake Washington, the body of water forming the eastern bounds of the Seattle peninsulas, and I really enjoyed it. It forced me to see places I've been near for most of my life at this point, but had always skipped over before. And it just felt a bit magical. No one is expecting you to walk between cities. The infrastructure is absolutely not designed for this. So there is this feeling of rotating 90 degrees to reality and traveling through some really slow wormhole to pop up again somewhere unexpectedly. I wanted to do something like that again. Something bigger this time. Somewhere new that I didn't know but would like to know better. Somewhere with a big obstacle in the middle to clearly define the parameters. I mean, I like the idea of walking around New York City or Tokyo or something, but that's a poorly defined challenge. How far inward from the borders or shoreline before you're cutting corners? If you're circumnavigating a body of water, though, it's simple. As long as your feet don't get wet, you aren't cheating. And not that far south of me, just 2 states away, was a part of the world I love and visit frequently, but have never gotten to know with any depth. And in the middle was the perfect obstacle, San Francisco Bay. A lesson I learned from the Lake Washington trip was to take the first day a bit easy, so I flew down in the afternoon. Seeing the bay from the air was a bit intimidating, I'm not going to lie. That thing is huge. The similar geographies sometimes mislead me into thinking of the Bay Area on the scale of Seattle, as if San Jose was the equivalent of Renton, but that is deeply inaccurate. It's more like Tacoma. Also learning from my Lake Washington trip, I decided to start at SFO and head counterclockwise from there. That would leave the excitement of the Golden Gate Bridge and San Francisco until the very end, as something to look forward to. Not that there wasn't plenty of other stuff along the way I was eager to see, but call me basic, I love big cities and iconic infrastructure. Grabbing my bag, I asked my boots if they were ready, and I set out to confront the first real uncertainty of the trip. How do you walk out of SFO? Mapping system said I would have to go way north before looping around, so I had picked a hotel assuming that would be necessary. But there was this access road heading south, which I wanted to check out first. It's a bit of a maze on the ground level, but eventually I got out and at first was greeted with a nice sidewalk, with nice public art even. But then the sidewalk just stopped. There was a bike lane though, so I pushed on. This certainly wouldn't be the last time a sidewalk ended and I had to walk in a bike lane or shoulder. It wasn't exactly inviting, but it worked. And honestly, I love exploring weird interstitial places like this. That's one of the reasons I like walking around cities. But there is also a real anxiety that you're walking into a dead end and every step is just another that will have to be retraced. Bike lanes are a pretty good sign though that there will be some way to get out at the far end, particularly once I saw a cyclist coming from that way. I eventually got dumped out next to this lovely estuary park, which apparently is the main hangout for plane spotters here. I admit, I did join in and wait a couple of minutes to watch this A380 take off, something I'd never managed before. A lot more graceful than I was imagining, at least from this distance. And then the first hotel was just another couple kilometers away, since an easy day with the airport detour factored in had turned into a downright trivial one without it. Most of that was along the Bay Trail, the incomplete collection of trails circling the bay, which I would be making use of on and off for the rest of the trip. Day 2, the first full day, ended up being a lot harder. It was hot, and while this area might claim their climate is best by government test, I'm simply not cut out for Mediterranean climates. Give me a nice foggy temperate rainforest and let the moss claim my body. That would be something else to look forward to as I looped around to San Francisco. I found myself paying attention to sidewalks a lot. I started a game looking for the oldest one I could find, but I hit a run of 1916 and 1914 dates here on day 2, and was never able to beat them. Sure drives home how cheap pedestrian infrastructure can be, though. Try and find a road that sees any use at all, which was last resurfaced during the Woodrow Wilson administration. But there were other sidewalk subtleties to be noticed, like how starting around Palo Alto, there were these regular WSG and Delta symbols. At first I thought they were just severely abbreviated contractor marks, but they were almost always towards the middle of a lot, and came in different orders. I finally realized that they meant water, sewer, and gas. Permanent utility locates, that's kinda cool. But it was also fun looking at less official contributions from while the concrete was setting. Lots of handprints, but also more than one heavy metal reference. Or even just looking for paw prints. It's kind of funny how this seems to capture a specific moment in time when that's equally true of all concrete pours. Later, my path took me back to the edge of the bay, which was always good for a nice cool breeze, and then later past Oracle headquarters. I followed enough sailing that, I won't lie, coming across USA 17 here, winner of the 2010 America's Cup, felt a bit like seeing a celebrity. Then it was finally time to collapse at the next hotel, and when I woke up, well, time to do it all again and again for the next 2 weeks. Day 3 started by wandering through the Electronic Arts campus, because I noticed a labyrinth on the aerial photography when planning the day at breakfast. As might be expected by someone who bought an obsolete machine tool expressly to make a custom labyrinth waffle iron, I'm a bit of a sucker for labyrinths when I come across one. This one was both elegant and quite big, adding almost a full kilometer to the day by the time I had finished it. It also has this charming snail at the center. Is this a reference to EA's Labyrinth of Time from way back in the day? I never played it. The tranquility of the labyrinth had been regularly interrupted by small planes taking off from a nearby airport, which happened to be my next stop for the Hiller Aviation Museum. Worth it for all the weird prototype helicopters and other flying platforms they used to churn out. From back before we realized that, no, not every household was going to have a helicopter in the garage. And personally, I think that's really for the best anyway. I spend enough time making sure motorists don't kill me in 2 dimensions. I'm okay not having to worry about them dropping down on me on Z as well. I'd like to hope for a more glorious cause of death than parking. After all this, I ended up on El Camino Real for one of the longer straight sections of the trip. Might have been the longest if I hadn't detoured into Redwood City proper for lunch. This closely paralleled the Caltrain route, and it was great getting to see the newly electrified trains in operation, particularly given what the change has done for its ridership numbers. Train wins in the US are so rare, you've really got to celebrate the occasional miracle. By the end of the day, I had made Menlo Park, just shy of Stanford campus, and the hotel there even conveniently reinforced a tangent from the last video. If you see a bunch of decorative binary bytes that all start with 0, go ahead and do the translation if you're bored. It probably spells something. As day 4 started, I made my way through the Stanford Shopping Center and into the Arboretum. We think modern tech people today get weird with their money, but I think the Victorian robber barons put in a strong showing. But the Arizona Garden is pretty cool, and they did found one of the world's great universities, so... What I came for was a bit deeper in. First, the collection of Rodin sculptures at the corner of Roth and Lomita. He, and his team, it's not like he did all the work himself, really were incredible at capturing form and emotion. I'm never going to turn down a chance to look at the Gates of Hell up close with all its incredible detail. The thinker was just a study for this. And then just up the street from that, the Andy Goldsworthy installation Stone River. The movie about him, Rivers and Tides, was one of the things that first got me thinking seriously about art, so I was really looking forward to this. I'd only seen 2 of his works in person before, at Kentuck Knob in Pennsylvania, but he has quite a few in the Bay Area, most of which would be on my route later on. As usual, I routed based on overall goals for the day, but also just looking at the map and seeing what looks interesting. If the only way to get over a stream for several blocks is a little bridge leading into a park, I'm definitely aiming for that. I spend a lot of time switching back and forth between Google Maps and OpenStreetMap. The OSM database is open for anyone to contribute to, like Wikipedia. In many parts of the world, it has a lot more low-level details, like this little desire path I came across on day 3, connecting a parking lot to a bus stop. This bypasses a section of road without any sidewalk at all, which is how I ended up on it. The path isn't there on Google Maps at all, unless you think to look at the aerial imagery, but it is fully mapped in OpenStreetMap, possibly added by one of the people who use it regularly to get to work. Google Maps is really aimed primarily at car routing. Everything else is of secondary importance, and it often shows. Following some of its bike riding choices would fully count as self-harm. Most of the rest of the day was spent working my way across residential Palo Alto and into Mountain View and the Google campus. If you notice a change in video quality shortly, it's because I had failed to upgrade my phone before leaving on the trip. Its battery wasn't holding much of a charge anymore, and needing to pull out the external battery several times a day was already getting very annoying. But then I realized I would be passing right by the only retail Google store on the West Coast, so now I'm shooting in 4K. But the real reason I was over here was the Computer History Museum, which I visited on the start of Day 5. I'd been before, but that was 15 years ago when they still had Difference Engine number 2 on display. It really is a lovely collection if you're into the history of computing and computing devices going all the way back. Or even if you just love the vibes of old hardware. The aesthetics of some of these are just incredible. Of course, they also all cost tens of thousands of $20-25 at a minimum, so you get what you pay for, I guess. The fact that the original Utah teapot actually exists as a physical relic and is being treated accordingly fills me with such glee. You don't often get to meet platonic solids in person. Choosing nature over freeway interchange, I took the back route across Stevens Creek, past the last outpost of Google's domain, and into NASA Ames Research Center and Moffett Field. There was a lot I wanted to see, like the Roverscape for testing rovers, the giant wind tunnel buildings, including the world's largest, and the legendary Hangar 1 built for airships in the 1930s, so large that fog can form inside. But there was also a small Moffett Field museum which I was curious about. It was mostly militaria, which isn't my thing, but there were also some interesting airship displays from the earliest days of the field. And in the very back they have what looks to be a complete link trainer. This was an almost entirely mechanical trainer for flying planes by instrument, based on the inventor's experience working on pipe organs and player pianos. There are some electronics, particularly for driving the crab to draw out the path the plane was taking by dragging a pin around on a map, but mostly it's vacuum-powered. Not vacuum tube-powered, vacuum-powered. Pneumatics, but with negative pressure. The altimeter, for instance, is a real altimeter, just a pressure gauge, but it's reading from a little tank which has air being sucked out of it as long as the plane is gaining altitude. It turns out these aren't particularly rare, and it's kind of weird I never noticed one in an aviation museum before, but I was pretty chuffed to stumble across it. The rest of the day was a couple of uneventful hours, ending in Sunnyvale just outside San Jose. I still think it's weird how rooftops are a cultural blind spot. Big hotels spend so much money on architecture and landscaping, yet still have bare roofs like this plainly visible from the rooms. I really don't understand why they're treated differently. Maybe I shouldn't look too closely or breach will come for me. Day 6 I took as a 0, except I still ended up walking quite a bit, just in a circle. This was my first use of transit along the way. The rule I set myself was simple. Continuous footprints, to borrow a term from the thru-hiker community. I always had to come back to the same exact point first before continuing on. Being my birthday, it was a good excuse to do some quality transit zoning out. I turned 48, which is the same age my dad was when he got emergency quad bypass open heart surgery. That was 30 years ago, and I've been watching the state slowly approach with dread my entire adult life. It's also about the age my maternal grandfather was when he got his bypass surgery. And about the age my paternal grandfather died because bypass surgery didn't exist yet. My dad survived and continues to survive, and the last heart scan I had turned up completely clean, but still, I liked it better when this day was still decades in the future. First up was the Winchester Mansion, which I really have mixed feelings on. It's quirky, unique architecture, and that's very cool. I love weird, sprawling houses. But all the silly legends the tour guide has to tell you, all clearly cynically made up and not a little bit disrespectful to what seemed to be a really cool historical woman, just set my teeth on edge. But without them, maybe it would have been leveled decades ago, so I guess I have to be glad for them, kind of? I don't know. I love to travel, but I sure hate being a tourist sometimes. There was also the Intel Museum. And it had some fun displays, but somehow came off feeling even lighter in content than the Winchester Mansion. Maybe I was just in a mood. In addition to all the brooding on mortality, my feet were pretty messed up, a situation that would not significantly improve for the rest of the trip. I've yet to figure out how to properly train for something like this. I spent the summer doing multiple long walks every week, but that just isn't the same as doing it day in, day out. It doesn't help that I'm a pretty slow walker. Day 7 started with a surprise visit to Crunch Labs, thanks to an invite from friend of the channel Evan Barnes. I was too busy learning about the industrial design they do for their kits to remember to film anything, sorry. But it's a very cool place. Thanks, Evan. A quick light rail trip back to meet up with my footprints, and it was time to push on, following the rail line as it cuts across the northern tip of San Jose, then back to trails along freeways. Soon I hit an important milestone. Okay, that is enough heading south and east. It is time to head north. This was a new phase of the trip, heading north up the eastern side of the bay. I was now in areas I had absolutely no experience with beyond driving through on I-880. I had left Caltrain behind and moved into the realm of BART. These were some long, hot days without much to do except keep putting one foot in front of the other. But the good thing about cities is that there are always interesting things to look at. Weird bits of infrastructure, random industrial warnings, or even just a really good tree. Poignant reminders of traffic violence, classic commercial signage, a set of replacement clock hands found laying on the ground. You never know. You might wander across a game of cricket, or just spend some time meditating on what a crime against typography the crossbar on the Q in the California license plate typeface is. Seriously, it looks like a diacritical broke off and is rattling around the bottom of the frame. You might see public art, or Pepsi flags flying at half-mast. I never did figure that one out. An old diner building that looks like it could walk away on chicken legs. The most ominous name for a dental clinic ever. Some lovely old art deco on buildings and street furniture. Fun business names. I started writing this section unsure how to politely say this area was kind of boring, but no. There's always a song in all the trouble and the strife. If humans are around, there will be interesting stuff. Today is day 8, which means I probably should have started recording things like this a week ago, but oh well. I think I'm still technically in Union City, or Hayward. I'm now in Hayward. Today I did 17 kilometers and could have done more. I was actually feeling great at the end of it. So maybe tomorrow I'll push a bit harder. What else can I say? Feet are still nasty. They don't hurt as much, but they're still nasty. Maybe this is why I didn't start doing these earlier. I'm a script guy. I like reading from a script. Yeah. I spent a lot of this section thinking about the veil of ignorance. This is a concept for moral philosophy, which suggests that the only way to design a just society is to do so without any knowledge of what position the designers will eventually inhabit within it. And that's an interesting idea, trying to imagine a society designed by a bunch of souls about to be reincarnated. But US pedestrian infrastructure really makes me doubt it as a practical tool. Because it is a goddamn inevitability that, if you live long enough, you will end up disabled. That's just a fact of living in human bodies. And yet we consistently design urban areas that aren't just lacking in accessibility, but are actively hostile to everyone who isn't in a car, particularly wheelchair users. Sidewalks that just end without warning. Beg buttons you couldn't possibly reach. Beg buttons hidden behind poles for no reason. The very existence of beg buttons. Overgrown greenery, sudden drops and barriers. These are all choices that we have made and continue to make for the most part. This is how we design our public spaces, despite knowing we will all need accessibility features eventually. So I'm not really sure what to do with the veil of ignorance as a concept. Maybe if our species could apply it properly, we wouldn't even need it in the first place? First half of the day wasn't so good. Still having feet problems, particularly my pinky toes. Getting pretty... Frankly, they're so blistered, and blisters on top of blisters, I'm kind of wondering if one of them's just gonna deglove entirely. So, that's exciting. But I think I can actually keep the schedule and do the full thing as planned, so I'm going to continue assuming I'm going to do that. I don't know. Oh, and I did laundry. Always good to do laundry. Second time on the trip. Those socks get pretty disgusting. And the lighting is terrible. See, I could have done that. Not that that's great. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. Anyway. By the end of day 10, I had made it to the Oakland airport. After a questionable breakfast, though far from the worst on this trip, I started working my way along the MLK Jr. regional shoreline. It was quite pleasant for being right on the edge of a major airport. The paths were mostly pretty good, with some bits of bike lane walking in between them. Then I crossed into Alameda, that place near the nuclear vessels I'd always heard of but had never visited before. Turns out it's lovely. I definitely need to go back sometime. Also, it has a spite house. God, I love a good spite house. Then across a nice old bridge into Oakland proper. I've spent some time here before, and I've always really liked it. After dodging through an industrial section, I followed the shoreline up along the park. Check out the grain on this anchor. It was old enough to be made from real wrought iron. You can even see how they chose to orient the grain when welding different sections together to maximize its strength. After the park, I crossed over the BART line with its distinctive wide-gauge track, and then into a commercial area as I neared downtown. It's so sad to see hostile architecture like this bench. Almost impossible to use, and I did try. I shouldn't have to say this, but Making urban areas worse because you don't want certain people to use them actually just makes them worse. We're not going to improve cities by making them miserable places to be. Hey, it's day 10? It's Tuesday. It's the second Tuesday of the trip. I am now in downtown Oakland. Oh, and then I ate a lot. I think Hiker Hunger is sitting in. I ate a lot today. So that's where we are on the trip. Bye. Heading out of downtown Oakland on day 12, it actually rained for the only time on the trip, so at least the jacket I brought was justified. Most of this day was spent on San Pablo Avenue, one of the longer straight-line sections of the trip. I came across this absolute stunner of a building, like Art Nouveau brutalism? Bru Nouveau? So cool. Eventually, after passing through Berkeley, I turned off San Pablo, heading down a nice and wide bike ped path to the waterfront. This took me a bit out of my way, but I wanted to see the not entirely salubriously named Albany bulb. This was basically a landfill for most of the 20th century, a dumping ground for all kinds of random construction debris. It's literally a pile of concrete and rebar with a thin layer of dirt on top. It became a bit of an autonomous zone with lots of outsider art people have built over the years. It also has some great views of SF and the Golden Gate Bridge across the bay. Weird to stand here, these things looking impossibly distant, knowing I'll have walked there in another couple of days. I first looked for the labyrinth because of course I did. This one was a lot smaller and also a continuous path where you don't have to turn around in the middle, which I like. Some cool dudes were hanging out nearby, but I tried not to bother them too much. I had also heard there was an interesting marble run, which I figured I might as well check out. I'm so glad I did, because it was so much more than I was imagining. This massive masonry structure, built in situ, is absolutely riddled with branching and intersecting tracks that all, more or less, run to a collection bucket at the front. I spent way too long messing around with it, only moving on when I could hear a family group with a lot of kids approaching. I've definitely got to get back to the Albany bulb someday. Very cool place. And there was even a snake. I really found myself paying more attention to wildlife than I usually do on this trip, possibly because this isn't an ecosystem I'm familiar with. Egrets? Yeah, I've got a few. And pelicans! Amazing to think that this is the degraded post-industrial amounts of wildlife. It's so hard to even imagine what the world was like before we got carried away there. Just north from Albany Bulb was another stop, Tepco Beach. For decades, the Technical Porcelain and Chinaware Company dumped its broken wares here. In archaeological terms, it's a midden. Another trash heap, just a bit more specialized. It really is a beach made out of broken bits of ceramics. I once went mudlarking on the shore of the Thames, and this is the closest to that experience I've ever had in the US. Except everything here is well under 100 years old, of course. And right next to a Costco. I finally looked up what these stickers meant. It's not a TCP port like I first thought. And hey, if there was anywhere in the world people advertise network services by just their TCP port, it would be here. No, it stands for Transportation Charter Permit, for things like town cars. And then I'm in a not the best hotel for tonight, but it's fine. Tomorrow is the day where I get to figure out, is the bridge going to work? The Richmond San Rafael bridge, that is. Because they're doing weird things when the bike pedestrian path is open, and the website is not entirely coherent on the subject and has been changed several times. So we'll see. If not, I'll just take transit back down and go across the Bay Bridge, but that would be disappointing. Then I definitely wouldn't be doing the whole bay, and I want to walk across the Golden Gate. Come on. So that's where I am. See you tomorrow. Day 13 started with a nice walk through more wetlands to get to the Rosie the Riveter National Historic Park. I like the monument, but I have to admit I'm pretty disappointed that it is bolted and welded together. I didn't see a single rivet, not even a pop rivet. And yes, I actually have riveted public art before, so I know how much work it involves. It's hard and slow and exhausting and freaking awesome. There is a museum that is part of the park, and it's a neat little place. Very well-designed exhibits covering a lot of interesting angles to the shipbuilding being done here during World War II, including healthcare. This was the start of Kaiser Permanente, one of the major US health insurance providers. I'll have to go back when I have more time to spare, but I had to keep pushing on because this was always going to be a very long day. I continued along through Richmond, which seemed like a great little neighborhood, then followed 580 westward past more industry to where the trail joined the Richmond San Rafael Bridge. This was where I was forced to skip the sliver of SF Bay north of the bridge. The completionist in me would have loved to include that last little bit, and all of San Pablo Bay as well for that matter. But the pedestrian options up there get very sparse very quickly. Even just getting to Vallejo would be sketchy, and the stretch west of there looked even worse. I actually drove by on the way home from Open Sauce last year just to see how deadly the shoulder looked. Pretty deadly, it turned out. And a real lack of hotels as well, so the Richmond San Rafael Bridge it was. This was the last big question mark, because the bridge path was closed during the week from 9 to 1500 for bridge maintenance work. But it was also going to be closed entirely Monday through Wednesday starting in the fall. No specific dates, but since this was already mid-September and the leaves had come to turning, I had to assume it might already be in effect. Luckily I was arriving on a Thursday, but still, this weird combination of seemingly contradictory closures didn't make me particularly confident it would actually be open. But in the end, I arrived right at 1500, and a Caltrans guy was sitting there waiting to open the gate exactly when it was supposed to. So after a brief rest, I pushed on. Bridges are weird bits of infrastructure to interact with recreationally. They're some of the largest and most impressive structures we make. But we've gotten so good at them that they can be a bit beyond human comprehension and scale. The aspect ratio is just too extreme. And the actual practice of walking across a bridge is usually brain-meltingly repetitive, coupled with the sensory nightmare of overwhelming traffic noise and exhaust. Not the most relaxing place to take a break. Type 2 fun, if it's fun at all. I had plenty of time to admire how all the bolts in these cover plates had been forcibly removed as part of the bridge inspection work. Multiple kilometers of this in progress for months at this point, and it doesn't look like a single one had gone gentle into that good night. Both a cutting disc and a torch were clearly involved, more violently on some than in others. Can't be tight if you're liquid. Yes, I was re-listening to Project Hail Mary at this point on the trip. From the bridge I at least got a good view of the section of the bay I was skipping, and north of that on into San Pablo Bay. It also offered some good views of passing traffic down on the water, tugboats heading onto another job, and the Lakespur ferry on its way. Reaching San Rafael marked another important milestone. Time for the last turn, the turn south. Which might feel like going downhill, but it would actually involve some 400 meters of elevation gain and loss between here and the airport. I'd made it back to the hills. Boy, am I tired. I'm really tired. Today was a very long day. That bridge section was just one long push the whole way across, very exposed, very loud, not entirely pleasant. Not the best lighting, but whatever. Good lunch or breakfast at that one cafe. That helped me get across. But yeah, tomorrow should be a bit easier, it looks like, so catch you then. Day 14 took me close to Sausalito, mostly following trails alongside 101 as it approached the Golden Gate, but also along some rail trails, including an old rail line that had been converted half to trail and half to single-track commuter train usage. This was an interesting area, with some of the best bike infrastructure I've ever seen, in the US anyway. Roundabouts, numbered routes, tight train line bike path integration. It was mostly a very pleasant walking experience. But this was also the first part of the trip where I had some serious navigation issues, getting stranded on the wrong side of an interchange with no officially sanctioned way to get across as a pedestrian other than backtrack a couple kilometers. Which, no, I did not do, screw that shit. I think it's because this is a series of narrow valleys which are mostly taken up by the 8+ lanes of 101. Always a shame to see so much of an area turned over to making sure people from somewhere else can get to somewhere else. Harder day than I wished it was. I thought this was going to be an easy day, but I made some wrong turns at the beginning, going over to see Alper Bowler's shop and talked to him for a while, which was really nice. I'm glad he invited me over. Ended up getting lunch at Whole Foods, which was kind of a mistake. Their sushi was terrible and the whole thing was very expensive, of course. Wrong room. Tomorrow should be pretty exciting overall. There's Sausalito, so I will probably stop in at the Bay Model again because it's really cool, and I'll be walking right by. And then the Golden Gate, and then the Presidio, and then San Francisco. So I have that to look forward to. At this rate, 3 more days of walking. They should be more exciting days and offer more opportunities for breaks during the day as well in a dense urban area. So that should be good. We'll see. Day 15 promised to be exciting, but the first half was a bad foot day where I spent the morning slowly learning to walk again. This was Saturday, and it showed what the bike infrastructure here was really for. Not commuters, though I had seen plenty of those on the previous day, but an absolutely unending stream of weekend recreational riders all headed out of the city. I managed to hobble as far as the Bay Model at least, so the pain I'd been subjected to was worth it. Better YouTubers than I have covered this better than I can, but basically, once upon a time, there was political will growing to make some truly catastrophic changes to the hydrology of the entire SF Bay and connected bodies of water. The Corps of Engineers got tasked with figuring out if it was a good idea or not. This was before it could be modeled on a computer, so instead they modeled it in concrete, covering 2 acres of space. It hasn't been used for research in a long time, but they keep it running and open to the public as an educational resource. Truly an awesome place. And even on a 1 to 1,000 scale, it's an intimidating thing to walk around. After some lunch, my feet had calmed down, and it was time for the long climb up to the bridge from sea level. And it was actually a nice reminder that while my feet might be having structural integrity issues, my legs had only gotten stronger. There was a good breeze, it was a coolish day, and I just stomped my way up the hill, until the bridge finally came into view. What a beauty. I'd driven across it before, and I even got to sail in under it when volunteering on the tall ship Lady Washington, but I'd never had a chance to walk across it before. And while it is certainly an incredibly large structure, it's still right on the edge of human comprehension. It helps, I think, that its aspect ratio isn't too flat. Things on planets get wider, so much easier than taller, so it's really special when a big cool thing actually feels like a tangible thing, not just a thin membrane draped across the landscape. It's probably just cultural biases growing up on the West Coast in the late 20th century with a Californian dad, but for me, this is the bridge, the one all others are compared against. It's absolutely perfect. And on into San Francisco. This meant working my way down the Presidio back to sea level to continue following the coastline for a bit. Past the windsurfers and the yacht clubs is a spit, and at the end of the spit is Wave Organ. A surreal folly made from granite and marble. It features about a dozen pipes which are supposed to play notes as the waves move over them. Emphasis on supposed to, as it wasn't actually making any noises when I was there, sadly, but it still looked pretty cool. Hey, it is day 14, the end of day 14, and I am in San Francisco. Today was not too bad. Well, the first bit of today was hard. Getting going was hard. The elevation gain was nothing. I quite enjoyed it, actually. It felt nice after all the flat that I've been doing. And it put pressure on different parts of my feet, which helped. And then the bridge, which is just so gorgeous in person. It really felt like a privilege to get to walk across it. At this point, I had about 30 kilometers left before SFO and several days before my vacation time ran out. Somehow I was ahead of schedule. I could take it a bit easy on day 16. So I started with a side trip. I finally made a pilgrimage to City Lights. As a high school loser who was way too obsessed with Howl, it's kind of weird I'd never gone before. Given my mass and space constraints, I thought I did well limiting myself to buying a single book. I went with a collection of Hesse's short stories, which seemed most true to that lonely teenage version of myself, absolutely terrified that he would end up like the Steppenwolf. Hang in there, kid. And since there I was, walking with my feet 1,200 meters off of Beale, I stopped by the Cable Car Museum. This is the #1 thing I always recommend to people looking for a quick little tourist thing to do. What you have to understand is that cable cars, cable trams if you're outside the US, they are just ridiculously cool things, in that they are both very ridiculous and very cool. I am so glad this one system remains operational out of the many dozens that once existed across the globe, because I am not sure I would 100% believe they were ever actually a practical, workable transportation system if I wasn't able to ride one myself. And of course I had to ride one on the way back to the path. Unfortunately it was so full my footage kind of sucks, so I'll use some from a previous trip. But there is nothing like rattling down a steep hill in one, the air acrid with smoke from the wood brake pads, wondering if this is the trip where it all ends up at the bottom of the bay. Absolutely fantabulous. On the official path again, I headed back up the Presidio, faced with the rare opportunity to see 4 more Andy Goldsworthy installations. Unfortunately, the number ended up being more like 2.5. The first one, Treefall, is built into this old powder hut, the kind with super thick walls designed to explode upward if anything went wrong. It's temporarily closed, but you can see the piece through the mesh over the doorway. The next is Earthwall in the Presidio Officers Club building. I had missed that it is only open to the public on Saturday, and this was Sunday. Blast. After clomping on up the hill to the upper edge of the Presidio, however, I was able to see Spire in all its glory. There was a fire a few years ago, but I'm not sure it hurts the effect. Like all his best work, it filled me with a surreal sense of calm. Not far from Spire is Woodline, the fourth and final Goldsworthy piece for the trip. Despite it never almost burning down, I think this one actually has lost the most of its impact from when it was originally installed. I was now in the southeast corner of the Presidio, so it was time to get back to real urban hiking. My goal was to get as far south in the Mission District as possible, about 8 kilometers away, and call it a day there. And it was a lovely walk. SF is really nice to walk around as long as you don't mind hills. I swung by the Painted Ladies since they were right on the way. They are very handsome, but I'm not sure I'd want to live in a house that has a whole park next to it dedicated to giving people a place to stare at you from. One of the most jarring things was the prevalence of LiDAR on vehicles on the peninsula. This had cut out sharply down in San Jose, but now I was back amongst them thicker than ever. I was seeing more LiDAR units before lunch than I'd previously seen in my entire life, and I used to work with them in grad school. I will say, in their defense, that I'm not sure I had ever once seen a taxi come to a complete stop at stop signs before. It wasn't far to Mission, seeing some of SF's wonderful heritage trolley car fleet on the way, and then down Mission itself, which had that great bustling energy to keep me going, despite it being the end of the day. I glided through the final kilometers. This was a good couple of days. I ended up getting a hotel back downtown and just took Bart back because the hotel options there weren't encouraging. So from there south is another 20 kilometers to SFO. When I take a midday break, I'm going to arrange my flight, and then I'll know when I have to be at the airport. And so then I can figure out how close the hotel actually has to be. Day 17 was the last full day, and it was a doozy. Starting at the BART station at Mission and 24th, I soon cut east across the first of 2 ridges in my path. It was a hot, dry, still day, and I was already feeling it well before noon. There was a slight break after working around the 580-101 interchange in Portalo, where I fortified myself with a nice strawberry boba, but soon I was crossing the next ridge and dropping down into Viz Valley. I know there are uncogged trains that do steeper hills than this, but not many. That's about an 8.5% slope. From here I left the residential and commercial areas behind and entered several kilometers of dusty industrial wasteland. It was nice seeing an old friend, but this was a brutal crossing. A desert in my heart and nowhere to hide. One of those days where you're balancing pushing hard to get it over with, while also trying not to push too hard and fall into heat exhaustion. This continued for about 5 kilometers until the blessed relief of an overpass. At this point, in full dirtbag hiker mode, I just didn't care. It was shady and it was cool. After some bland office buildings and things once again became a bit more industrial towards the airport, I was almost directly under the SFO flight path. The last full day was over. I am 4.8 kilometers from the airport, which means I'm 4.8 kilometers from closing the circle. Today was pretty hard. And, after the excitement of the last 2 days, it just wasn't that great. But, still bits of San Francisco I'd never seen before. I did do another load of laundry, so I can have very clean clothes in reserve to change into before checking my bag, to uphold the social contract for the person whoever is sitting next to me on the plane. And then I'm done. Final day. Day 18 was a breeze, just 5 kilometers. Though it was through some of the more pedestrian-hostile streets on the entire trip. The sidewalks constantly disappeared from one side or the other, but traffic was low and it was just annoying, not hugely dangerous. Still a massive middle finger to anyone walking, of course, much less in a wheelchair. And this was, I should emphasize, the only officially recognized way to reach the airport if not in a vehicle of some kind. Soon I was wandering through the maze of surface-level utility roads under the airport parking structures, and then onto the arrivals level. And there, exactly where I left this building 17 days previously, was door 5 for Terminal 1. The circle was closed. And that was the hike. Counting just the main path, not any walking on the side trips, it was 240 kilometers, or almost exactly 150 miles. 18 calendar days, 16 full days of walking. Frankly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the whole thing. I'm really glad I'll now always have this weirdly intimate connection to the areas that I walk through. But I have to admit that since it was a new area to me, I never quite got that sense of cheekiness I get when walking around Seattle. I didn't know which areas were only conceptualized as being connected by cars and transit, so walking between them didn't feel that out of the ordinary. Oh well. If you've stuck around this long, thank you for putting up with an experiment by someone who has no experience travel vlogging. It's a format I watch quite a bit of myself, and I just couldn't resist giving it a go. I think I was getting better towards the end, but that's a very slow feedback loop which will only truly be closed with the release of this video. I want to keep doing big trips like this as long as I'm able, whether or not I make videos about them. But it won't be often. 2027 might be the next one when I turn 50. That'll be 20 years since I paddled the Mackenzie, so it should be something significant. I had been thinking about doing the Pacific Crest Trail, but I'm honestly not so sure about that anymore. Maybe a cross-continent bike trip? Well, until then, I need to get back in the shop. Cheers.